Our guest today is a vibrant and knowledgeable lender who is basically raised in the real estate industry. She became a lender at the young age of 23 and now owner of a firm capital with husband, Al Gonzalez. She is beaming with energy, and all of her clients rant and rave about her. Her commitment to providing excellent service to her clients is admirable. I'm happy to have her here with us today. Please welcome Jessica Gonzalez.
Hey, welcome.
Hi, guys.
How's it going?
And congratulations on your recent closing. I know that we just closed on Sparta.
Yes.
Cute little young couples who's anxious to start their family.
Yes.
And
Super cute.
you were ready to close. You know, most lenders, they'll, get things rolling like the first week and be ready to close in about 30 days. But I think you were ready to close. You had clear to close
like
in
a few weeks before. Yeah.
Ready to go.
It was like 14
I'm like,
days.
Graceland, are we closing?
Yeah, 14 days. I hadn't even got the RR out, which the RR is the request for repairs. So if you're going through the buying process, you have a certain time period of inspections. I think ours was reduced down to like 10 days, and we had them done in 7 days. And by the time I didn't even have the request for repairs out yet, and you're like, I've got clear to close. Let us know when you're ready to fund. Like, I'm like, okay.
Let us know when you're ready.
Okay, well. And then on that one, it was a country property. It was so weird because they have a community well. So I had to do research on how to obtain information about the community well. Like, what information do I provide them?
Yeah.
What are the water resources? Who is in charge of maintaining the water?
Yeah.
And it was a little bit different than a private well. And then on that one also, we had asked the seller to do the septic pump, but then they said, no, we're not going to do the septic pump. And so I forgot up until like the very last moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to remove our contingencies, but we forgot to do the septic pump because the seller's not going to do it. So we should go ahead and do that now. And then luckily there was an amazing company who got out the very next morning.
Yeah.
Like I called them at 6 p.m. at night. And they're out there at 8 a.m. pumping it. It was amazing. So the clients were extremely happy. They actually, were so grateful like for my services, but I feel like they were like, and the lender, but because it seems so effortless, I feel like a lot of
they forgot.
Yes. I feel like
I'm like in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of clients, they always like are like, oh my God, the lender is just hounding me for all this paperwork. Or I have one client who actually, she uses the Affirm app that lets you like break up your payments into 4 payments. Yeah. And I guess the builder lender would like have her give a statement every single time that she used it.
Right,
and they're like, hey, how about like just don't use that anymore? Because it was creating so much paperwork and she was getting so frustrated.
Yeah.
So these clients, they had zero frustration. What do you think made it the easiest in working for their file?
I think the fact that we got a lot up front. So I think during the pre-approval, if you're getting everything you need to up front, it makes it a lot less of a headache during the, I guess, like underwriting process.
Yeah.
So as soon as they went into escrow, I made sure I had the last 30-day pay stubs, 2 months bank statements, pretty much anything else I was going to need. So as soon as it went into underwriting, it was very smooth.
Yeah.
You also want to make sure you're getting like the verification of employment up front. That makes it easy. So that way the underwriter already has that. So everything kind of just like breezes through. I think that was probably the easiest part.
And you don't give pre-approval letters without seeing all of their documentation, right?
Yes.
So they had started this process with you what seemed to feel like maybe a year ago.
Yes.
So that was the first time that you had pulled their credit. You asked them for documents. Yes. Did they provide you all the documents at that time and you just got updated documents? Okay.
Yeah. So what happened was I do remember. So that day we were out, you're like, I need to get them updated, but now they're looking again. Yeah. So at that point, I'm like, hey, I need 30-day pay stubs, 2 months bank statements, and everything updated. And then I think that was a Friday when we came back to work Monday, I'm like, we also need a verification of employment. So everybody got that updated right away. Yeah. So as soon as everything went to underwriting, it was very streamlined because all that was already updated. So had to repull credit, all of that. So it was very fresh. So I feel like that made it very streamlined for them. Yeah. Plus, I feel like he was, I will say, he was a overqualified borrower. So I feel like luckily for him, like we didn't have a lot of hiccups because I feel like we weren't tight on ratios or anything. Everything was very streamlined for him.
And I mean, going with that, it's always great when you have a really good, solid buyer that's got everything in line, all their paperwork in order. But I do know, especially right now with the rate environment that we're in and how volatile it is with rates going higher and purchase prices staying pretty high, What are you guys seeing as a trend with lenders? Like, how much more challenging is it getting through a file these days, and quoting pricing and making sure that you're keeping pre-approvals updated? Like, what are you seeing out there in the market?
So, like as you said, the market's changing every day. So I think just staying very connected with our agents and making sure, like, if you guys need a pre-approval, that we're making sure that that client is still pre-approved that day. Like, and honestly, even maybe a little higher. So if I'm going to take it up a quarter, let's say, so for example, a quarter, if that day we're at 6.99 and I push it up to 7.25, like, I know they're still pre-approved at that percent. In the event that rates do rise, that person's still pre-approved. So I think when I'm sending out estimates, I'm going to be at that day, and I'm making sure I'm very transparent with the client and letting them know this is where rates are today. But obviously anything can change daily. So if they do, I'm going to let you know. But I think just being a little conservative and even taking that up higher when I'm running DU, which is desktop underwriter with Fannie and Freddie, that we're making sure that those numbers are in line, so that when you're taking clients out, that you're not like overstretching them or putting them into something they can't afford. And so then when you're putting in offers, that now they can't afford it. So as long as we're being conservative, I feel like it's better for everybody. So that way you're more prepared, the client's more prepared, they're okay with the monthly payment. You guys know, like, they're good to go even if we push it up a half a quarter higher.
And kind of what you're saying with that as well, so for a buyer who's like tuning in and listening to this right now and is like considering getting pre-approved and they're ready to purchase a home, how can that affect a payment? Like, realistically, let's say you're like a 0.25% lower or 0.5% higher. When you talk about like fluctuation in payment and what that does to DTI, what do you see on something like that, just so they have an idea like why it's so important?
Depending on the purchase price, we're talking anywhere from, it could be as low as $20 a month to as high as $100 a month. So that's where we try to be kind of transparent. Like, this is where rates are today, but if things move up, you could be $100 more a month if you're in that 500 plus range. If you're in that 250 to 400 range, maybe it's $50 a month. So it's not a huge difference, but we just want to always be transparent and make sure that they're okay with the payment, so that you guys aren't wasting your time, they're not wasting their time, everybody knows where we're at, and they can
I feel like a big like misconception is I go on Zillow and I put in my price and I use the payment calculator.
And I hear that all the time.
Yes. Like, why is my payment increased? So educate the world right now.
Okay.
Why should they not use the Zillow estimator?
I feel like the Zillow estimator, a lot of times, so obviously we have different counties, right? So even in California, there's different counties, but I mean, California is pretty similar, right? So, but different states, different areas. So when you go to Zillow, that's what, nationwide?
Right.
Yeah. So they're not going to take into consideration what California's tax rate is. So if I'm looking at property taxes in California, you want to make sure that that's kind of where you're at. That's why you want to check with your lender, because I know where our tax rate's at and where the nation's at. So maybe other areas are going to be lower than where California's at. So I feel like, honestly, that's where a lot of times the biggest misconception is. And I feel like the rate they're giving you on Zillow is just kind of like a nationwide rate. It's like if you're putting 3% down on a conventional loan, your rate's going to be a lot different than if you're putting 25% down with a 800 credit score on Zillow.
And do you think that Zillow also, like, automatically puts like the 20% down?
Yes.
And doesn't factor
100%.
in, it's like typical credit score, let's just
5%
assume.
down.
I think it's very generic.
Yes, it's very
specified.
generic.
And you would agree that like most programs are very specific to the individual borrowers.
Yes, exactly.
And if they do quote taxes and insurance, it's probably not accurate, especially
not
with
accurate.
Like insurance here in California right now with what we're going through.
Exactly.
What are you guys seeing with that? Let's talk about insurance and
oh
the
boy.
changes. Doesn't seem like anybody wants to insure
That's a
California,
fun one.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So insurance is probably the highest I've seen it ever in my career, which is not like a detour for purchasing a home. It's not horrible, but honestly, like 2 years ago, I'd quote like $50 a month for a normal just neighborhood here in Fresno, right? Now I won't quote less than $100 a month. So for insurance, and that's just being conservative. Again, I'm very conservative. I like to make sure you have a little padding. Like, so for example, like our borrowers in Madera, if you're on property or you're kind of like out in the outskirts, like obviously your insurance is going to be a little higher, especially like fire, like that's going to be a little higher. just because there's more of a risk. If something were to happen to your home and you're in the outskirts, like your insurance is going to be more expensive. So I would say for now, your insurance is probably going to be anywhere from $100 to $200 a month is what I would probably estimate, where previous years I would estimate $600 a year. So $50 a month.
Yeah. So factoring all that in, and you talk about pre-approval amount, and then you talk about with the rising rates and, you know, payments being a lot higher. How is it with that conversation? Because we try to explain to our buyers, I think, on a regular basis, let's not necessarily look at the max amount that you're approved for. Let's talk about your lifestyle and the payment that you're actually comfortable with and how that varies. So kind of talk about that from a perspective of like, okay, if you're a buyer in this market and you're a first-time home buyer, it's great to want home ownership, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want to be house broke either. So how do you kind of guide people in finding that sweet spot of like, I get this is the max, but for what you're looking for,
this is kind of where you're going to be.
This is where we want to be, yeah.
So when it comes to the pre-approval, I think, like, for me, I always like to ask up front when I have that conversation, like, what are you comfortable with? Are you renting now? What are you paying now? So that kind of gives me an idea. Like, if you're paying this much now, like, okay, you're going to be comfortable with this. But I always like to know, what are you paying now and what are you comfortable with? So I think when I do the pre-approval, I like to show them options at what they're comfortable with and then what they qualify for. So that way they can kind of see, like, hey, here's the difference. And I understand, like, you don't want to be house broke, but in reality, rates are going to come down. Like, they're not going to be at this, you know, national level forever. So, you know, once they do come down in the next 6 to 18 months, like, we can refinance you. So then your payment is set. You're not set at whatever your landlord's telling you your payment's going to be. You're set at this payment because you already purchased the home. So yeah, you're going to be here for a little while, but then hopefully in the next year we refinance you and that's going to come down even more. So I just feel like giving them options, like, if you don't like where you want your payment to be, like, this is what you can afford. So if you're okay with this for the next year, then there's options too, like rate buy downs for the next, you know, 2-1 buy downs, 1-1 buy downs where we buy down for a year. So that way we can kind of get them comfortable with their payment for the next year until we can refinance them to where they need to be.
Perfect. 2-1 buy down. If I'm a buyer listening to this podcast, I have no clue what that is. Tell me what a 2-1 buy down is.
So a 2-1 buy down. So for example, if your rate today is, let's just say you're in an FHA loan and your rate is 6.25 today, we lock you in. A 2-1 buy down would mean for the first year of your payment, it would be 4.25. The second year of your payment, it would be 5.25. And then year 3 and on, you would be at the 6.25. So the 2-1 means I'm buying it down 2 points for 1 year, 1 point for the next year, and then the third year and on, you're taking on that actual interest rate. Most people are going to refinance, like I said, in the next 18 months. So realistically, you're not going to have that 6.25. You're going to be at that 4.2 or 5.2 until you refinance.
And I feel like even if the rates don't drop in the next 18 months, which I think everyone's on board if they do, you just hold on to that property and acquire the equity, and eventually you will be in a position where you can push it out another 30 years. So even if like you're entering into your new home as like a worst case scenario.
Yes.
The only time that I've heard like anything different is from a client who saw something on TikTok and she sent it to me, and it was because in that state, so again, we're talking about like you have to like I feel like real estate and lending is all very hyper local. It could be different from here to down south and different states, but in different states, new construction was selling properties and assessing the tax values at the property land value. So then when the taxes reassessed the following year, they were reassessed much higher, and then their payments were changing by $800. And so my client was like, please tell me this is not going to happen to me. I'm like, no, because in California, we assess the value as the purchase price. So we're not assessing, you know, your ground, like your dirt, and saying, okay, this dirt is worth $25,000. So we're going to tax you at $25,000. In California, we project what you're going to be paying with the home. And the purchase price is going to give you your estimated taxes. So it's a little bit confusing because there's so much information available, and it's very misleading. Another thing that buyers oftentimes have confusion about is not necessarily like VA clients, but in general, let's just say VA for an example. I am getting 100% financing, so I don't need to have closing costs.
I don't have closing costs.
Yeah. Or I get into the house for free because I'm getting this down payment assistance program. So they have a very hard time understanding what 100% down payment coverage means versus closing costs and what all that means. So what are the common questions that you have to clarify for buyers?
So like cost to purchase, closing costs.
I think the biggest misconception is when I throw out there like, well, your closing costs are going to be between 2.5% and 3.5%. Like people are like, whoa, that's so much, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest thing that they need to understand is that half of that is going to be their taxes and insurance, which are prepaids that go into an escrow account for them.
And when you say prepaids, that means at least like 6 months have to be paid up front.
Yep, pretty much. So whatever your tax amount is, so let's just say for easy math, $600 a month in taxes, right? So if I have to collect 6 months of that, we're talking $3,600. Wait, 6 times 6. Yes, 3,600.
You got it.
Yes, 3,600 just for the taxes they're going to collect up front as a prepaid, so that escrow makes sure they have enough in there that when the taxes are due, they can pay the county for those taxes. Same for insurance. They're going to collect a whole year up front for their insurance. And like we just talked about, insurance is going up. So a whole year they need, plus they're going to collect probably about 3 months of just an impound, like to make sure they have enough in case that increases, that they have a little cushion. Mm-hmm. So we're talking right there, that's over $5,000 basically. If we're talking $100 a month for insurance, $3,600 for just taxes that they're going to need, right there we're talking $4,800 plus 3 months pad, over $5,000. So that's where I tell them like it's definitely going to be 2.5% to 3.5% just for closing costs. And everybody wants their taxes and insurance included. People don't want to pay that separately. They don't want to have to, make a check to the county every 6 months and then to their insurance every 12 months. Especially when we're talking about how expensive it's getting. That's something they don't want to have to worry about later on down the line. So it's just something, if it's in their payment, they don't have to worry about it. They pay into that account up front, it's taken care of, and then they don't have to think about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people think like the closing costs are just fees that are going into the world and never getting it back. And a big portion of that, to your point, it's going to collect for the future. And we actually own rental properties, and we have one property right now that we don't have taxes and insurance impounded.
You have to pay
and
separately?
I had to pay the check. Well, the first disbursement for taxes just last month.
Yeah.
And I really wish that they were impounded. So it's definitely something we'll be refinancing and addressing.
It's just nice to like not have to think about it. And it's just included in your payment. It gets paid and you don't have to worry about it. So but that is a big portion that I think people, when they're thinking about fees and what they're going to have to come in with, you're correct. Like it's one of those things that they're like, whoa, why is it so expensive? And I have to tell them, well, when you look at up front, me as a lender, I send them estimates showing exactly what everything's going to so they can see it. But I also like to explain, like, look, this is why it's so much. You can see here you're paying, a quarter of that into this escrow account. So.
And what are origination fees versus process fees? And because I feel like there's some builders out there that charge like 1 to 3 point origination fees.
Yes.
And their closing costs are much, much higher.
Yes.
So I'm, able to explain like the fixed closing costs and taxes and
versus
insurance.
Origination.
And so it's like, how do I explain to my clients why the closing costs were, 5% with the builder and 2.5% with you?
And it's how it's math, right? Because when you look at it, you're looking at, okay, we're going to charge 3 points, and then you'll go in, they'll be like, oh, but we're giving you like a $5,000 closing cost concession. But it's like, is it really a concession, or are you just accounting for it somewhere else?
Yeah.
And so I always tell people to get a second opinion, even if you're going with a builder, just so you can see what you're getting into. So
and Frankie and I recently did this for a client that we did with Al, your husband.
Yeah.
And she wanted the best lender, and I was like, I have many lenders that I love. I'm happy to have them all write you up a quote. And so there was 7 lenders who ended up giving her an estimate. Wow. And I thought it would be fun just to like...
Grayson was curious. She was
like, I think she beat the record. I'm like, 7?
Yeah. So Al, out of all of them, there was a second runner that was like really sad to lose to Al. But at the end of the day, Al just gave her that option first. You know, he was the first one to be creative in her situation. So that's what I love about Affirm Capital in general, is that I think that you guys don't like cookie cutter people's portfolios and just say, which actually almost every single one of them did. They gave almost the same exact rate, nearly the same closing costs. And so it was like almost identical, where it wasn't, nothing was really popping out. And although Al's closing costs ended up being higher, it reached her goal, which was the lowest payment, the lowest rate. And it's like when we were talking to her and trying to educate her, people didn't have the same taxes. So I feel like anybody who's shopping their loan, the very first thing, and it was the very first thing, we made like a spreadsheet for her. And we said, the taxes and insurance should be the same. So even though these people quoted you as a lower payment, their taxes and insurance are not correct. Yeah. So let's adjust those. And then their payment actually was higher. Yeah. So I feel like lenders do kind of tricky things like that. Yes. Or they bundle their fees to where like you can't really tell. You can't tell who's who. What, like how much is going what I'm paying to what. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone just has their own way of doing it, right? So you've got to kind of dig through it and figure it out. And I know right now we just probably threw like 15 different questions at the same time. So let's see how many of you remember. We'll go back from the beginning.
Well, and just kind of I'll go to the origination. I feel like I'm very transparent. So I like to give a couple options. So I like to tell people like off the bat, I normally will, in this rate environment, I will normally quote with 1 point. And I do that on my estimates on, Instagram, just my generic estimates I put out there. So in your, with
it'll show one origination
point, and it'll be there in the, in the quoted underneath. Now, when people go shopping online, right, you get those clients that are like, I'm going to go shop online. I'm going to go find the best rate. I'm reading some of these. It's like they're charging 2 or 3 points. Yes. They want 30% down. It's an 800 credit score. So there's so many different things that they need to meet to get that rate. So when they're sending me these rates that they're shopping, I'm like, well, you realize I'm quoting you 1 point with this rate at your credit score. Like they're quoting you with an 800 credit score with 30% down and with 2 points. Like this is where that rate is. So that's why you need to understand. That's why it's so much lower. I can give you 2 points with your credit score, but it's not going to be the same as what you're seeing because this is a completely different scenario. So you've got to read those little asterisks.
Do they understand when you tell them?
They kind of do, because I'm like, we don't have 30% down. We don't have an 800 credit score. Like this is what they're quoting, right? Like, so when we're looking at a 720 with 5% down, like you're not in that bracket. Like you're not in that bracket to get this interest rate.
You're not comparing apples to apples.
Exactly. Yeah. So they kind of start to understand then when I'm like, if you want to put 30% down, like I can definitely get you that rate, but I can't if you're not going to put 30% down because that's what you're comparing me to right now. So I think that's like the biggest thing where online lenders, you kind of have to be careful because it's like the origination they're quoting is going to be like almost out of this world just to kind of make that rate look really good, obviously, And
I think to your point, I'll just pause for a second because we were talking about earlier how you don't issue a pre-approval until you've seen all the documentation. Exactly. You looked at everything. A lot of times when buyers out in the industry, you guys are getting quotes and you're doing things online. Yes. They haven't pulled credit. Nope. They haven't looked at documentation. They haven't looked at employment history.
It's kind of like shooting out a very
it's like they're shooting out a very vague
we want
number.
You to love
qualification, not a pre-approval.
Yeah.
We want you to love us and choose us, but then we're gonna like give you worse and worse.
But then once we actually get all of your documentation, we're gonna give you the true rate, which is what I do up front. Yeah, like I'm not going to issue that until I have all of that. And I'm very transparent with like, this is where rates are today. It could change at any time. Obviously.
I remember Frankie and I did a transaction. We won't say the name of who it was. It was the worst. So they were referred to us by another real estate agent who had done a lot of business with them. And so we trusted that, he was treated good. So he's going to treat us good. And throughout the transaction, the information was just getting worse and worse and worse. And
you're like,
no. So the final point where we were told we didn't qualify.
Yeah, like no, we were told several times throughout the process, you qualify, you don't qualify. You qualify.
You don't qualify.
You don't qualify. You qualify. You don't qualify. And it was like they told us the first time that we didn't qualify after I sold my house. So my house
we were already
was literally
homeless
sold.
At the time. We were already like
I accepted
with family.
Yeah, I accepted a cash offer. We closed in 10 days, and on the 11th day, they said you don't qualify. And I was like, that would have been nice to know. Yeah. Before I sold my 10 days ago.
Yeah. Like that would have been very nice to know.
Plus there was all the preparation and leading up to the listing point. Like it wasn't like we like blindly were just like, oh, let's see if we qualify. Like we did all the qualifications up front. He was like, yes, you're golden. We're like, great, we'll sell our house. Okay, house is sold. Oh no, you don't qualify. And it's like, oh, the only way that you will qualify is if you do this. And we're like, oh great.
Yeah, and this is from people that are like educated in the industry, right? Like Grayson have been like in real estate, like 15 years at that time.
Gosh.
I worked for JP Morgan Chase, like in finance, like, so
we've never had clients in these kind of situations. I think
like, why am I in this situation?
Yeah, it was us personally.
Of course it would happen to us, where our family ended up homeless and I had to negotiate. Like there was a random...
Grayson lost a finger.
That's a whole nother podcast.
It is. Yeah, we'll definitely get into it at some point. Come on, stick your hand up. Let's see the finger.
She's like, no.
God, let's see the finger. Yeah. I feel like that guy.
Well, you can't just do the middle.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah, you see how it's a little bit?
Oh my goodness.
Just not the whole thing, just a little portion of it.
It's like 1/8 of my finger there, in case you didn't know. Do you know that story?
Israel,
oh my gosh.
Israel, remind me. I have the raw picture. We'll have to post it on social media after we post this.
I've never heard of that.
No.
This one, so we can see it.
Now we have to bring in the agent who we did that transaction with, and she didn't believe me.
I did not.
She didn't believe that I chopped off my finger. There was blood splatter all over the concrete floor, and they thought I was just doing it to like delay the move out time, and I'm like, no, my finger is off.
No, we literally are in the emergency room right now. Can you help find the finger?
No,
well, sidebar, because we're going to continue this, but if you ever lose an extremity, you cannot put it directly in ice. You have to put it in a airtight or watertight bag first and then put it on ice. They would have been able to reattach Grayson's finger.
If I would have thought, like, now in any type of emergency, always just use your Safari or Google and say, what should I do if I cut my finger or cut my finger off or whatever? Because like in all the movies, in all the Hollywood movies, they always say, put it on ice, put it on ice.
See, and my husband makes fun of me because all I do is follow Google.
Yeah.
He's like, don't do that.
And then,
we put it on ice, but we didn't put it on ice.
We got the finger and we put it on ice. I'm like walking around with a cup like this full of ice with my finger on top.
Oh, no.
And well, I'm holding it in this hand because this is the one that I had. Like, I just didn't want to see it. I wrapped it so many times in like a whole big wad of paper towels. He thought I was joking, and the other person thought I was joking, and everyone was laughing. And I'm like, "Is my finger over there? I think my finger is over there. If you could just look, I think is that
it's
my
right
finger?
There. There it is.
That's my finger.
Yeah, and
my mom was with us. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I think I found it."
And then she's
like,
like,
"Oh my god."
She's like,
there it is.
And she didn't know what to do with that. I was like, "Put it on ice." And then so she goes in, she gets some ice, and she's like, and she drops it in there. And she's like, here. And I had to, they were holding up a fridge. No one could help me.
I was holding up a fridge by myself because they all dropped it because she just lost her finger. And I'm literally standing under this fridge in a U-Haul. I feel like we're giving away
too much information.
I know. Jessica's like, oh my gosh, where did this go?
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I was interested in this story, actually.
I
didn't know. So I'm like,
I was trying to focus on the mere fact that there was a foreclosure that I saw that no one was living in that was having attempted break-ins. So I called the listing agent because, again, we have nowhere to live. And so I'm like, hey, do you mind?
Hey, this will work.
Yeah. Hey, do you mind if I like crash there for 3 weeks until I get to my new house? And then
we'll take care of it. No one will break in
crazy
anymore.
Times, right? Like, can I go live in your foreclosure for 3 weeks?
And they agreed. And it was
like
we
took care of it and we kept it clean.
The pool was green.
Yeah, we tried cleaning the pool.
We're like, we're not gonna go swimming.
Oh my god! Yeah. So me and our family at that time was a family of 9 in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,300 square foot home living. And I also got salmonella because apparently small fridges that you like transport everywhere do not refrigerate chicken as cold as it should be. So we had ordered chicken in. I put it in the fridge. I put it on top of a salad the next day, and I had salmonella. I went showing like in the mountains with salmonella, and like it was
you
awful.
were not good. Yeah,
I'm like,
you were not good.
As it was just like going down my intestinal tract, it was just so painful. I'm like, okay, this has got to be like our forever house because I've literally lost a finger. Yep. We're living in a foreclosure.
Did you guys buy it?
We ended up getting
That's the house that we live in.
That's the house that we live in now. Yeah.
So that was a 3-bedroom.
And that's why we're like.
No, the one that we live in now is not the foreclosure house. Is the one we were staying in.
Okay, so the one you were buying. Okay,
is the one that they said we didn't qualify for.
We were sleeping on air mattresses.
Yeah.
So you were making it work.
We were making it work, and because at that point we had to because they said you had to sell your house in order to now qualify, even though they said we qualified before. So I think the whole moral of this story and going on the tangent of losing a finger and all that is if you are going to get pre-approved, make sure you submit your documentation.
Yes.
Make sure the lender that you choose pulls your credit. Don't pull your credit with too many lenders. Like,
no,
you don't want everyone to pull your credit, right? But definitely make sure that they're comfortable that you qualify.
And make sure that it's 100% a pre-approval, not a pre-qualification.
Yes, definitely a
that they ran everything they need to, and that it goes. I mean, you can go another step to go to an underwriter, which is great. But if it's a legitimate lender and you're doing an underwriting, then that's fine.
Like that lender should have been legitimate. And
I feel like I would have been very upfront with you guys, like, hey, we're hanging by a string, but I think we can make this work.
And I don't know. Yeah.
So you knew, we're going to make it. Yeah. We're barely going to make it, but we're going to make it.
It was one of those bank statement programs, and I submitted 250 pages of bank statements up front before, so nothing really changed.
Yeah.
Aside from maybe the program itself.
I was going to say, so when we're doing outside of like the
traditional
Fannie, Freddie, FHA, HUD guidelines, they can change at any time, I will say, but they should have taken into account right away, like kind of where you're at. With the most conservative, like if we're using 50% expenses, we know where your calculations are at, and this is where we're going to be. But I will say in those ones, it can be a little tricky because they can change a little bit. So if it's not traditional, we can't run the underwriting right away
boy, was it tricky.
But it sounds like you guys got it figured out.
I totally think we should have Graceland's finger picture as the thumbnail for this podcast episode.
Ew, that's so gross. I mean, you can literally see it in my eyes. I'm smiling because
I'll show it to you after the podcast.
I need to see this. Picture. I really need to see this.
Oh, it's classic.
I've never even heard about this.
Oh my gosh! Good. And when I drove myself to the hospital,
how did you break your finger?
Break it? Or
did you cut it off?
No,
under a fridge. All right, so we'll get into it really quick.
Okay, I don't want to get a whole nother story, but now I'm like, how did you lose a finger?
All right, we're good.
How did you lose a finger?
So we're gonna go with it.
Wait, I want to get her reaction on film of her seeing the picture.
Okay.
Sure. All right, hold on. I'll find the
picture.
But
I'm like, how do you lose a finger? That's where I'm like.
Well, I'll tell the story while you.
Yes, I'll find the picture.
Find the picture. Okay.
Okay, we're doing this right now.
I had just moved out of our primary residence, our 4-bedroom house that we owned with our kids.
Okay.
I was rushed out of there in 10 days. So I had 10 days to pack up that house and move. And that move I paid for movers. And then we moved into the temporary house, or I think we moved in with your mom.
Yeah, we
moved
in
with his mom. And his mom's house was for sale.
Because we were buying it multi-gen, the final house.
So me and mom were supposed to go 50-50 and buy the big house together and all live there. So we were told we just had to sell our house and show them the final settlement statement.
Yeah.
Then when we got into mom's house, so I did one move, packed it, moved into mom's house. Mom's house, we get there, and literally the day that I just moved in, they told us, no, we have to have the final settlement statement for that house too. I'm like, so we have to close, which it was in escrow, and we were right at the finish line, but we thought we were going to close concurrently. So I just had one more move to do from mom's house to the big house.
Yeah. He
said, no, I need the final HUD. So we tried to negotiate a seller in possession where we move out after the close, but those buyers were like, no way. We don't know. We don't want squatters.
No.
Yeah. And this was in 2018. So then I'm like, okay, well, what do we do? So I found that foreclosure. We agreed to stay there for 3 weeks while we close on our house.
Yeah.
So I had just moved into mom's house, had like barely any sleep, and then they told me we had to close it. So then in 2 days I had to move out of that house. So I literally had zero sleep. Like I was hungry. I hadn't eaten very much or slept very much in like 48 hours. And I literally, everyone else was working and doing stuff. So it was like me and my mother-in-law's boyfriend who like moved everything out of the house into a U-Haul.
Yeah.
So the first move, I hired movers. The second one, it wasn't really a lot of my stuff. And so I was like, are you guys paying for movers? How are we doing this? And she's like, I can't pay for movers. So I physically moved a lot of the furniture. The last thing was a small fridge. The small fridge was not packed with food, but she ended up deciding she wanted to take the big fridge.
Yeah, which was a huge side-by-side.
To our next location.
So we're moving this fridge.
So they packed the empty fridge and everything goes to storage temporarily. And we're trying to load the big fridge. Frankie and my mother-in-law's boyfriend go to get the U-Haul to load this one huge refrigerator full of food. And when they come back, I'm looking at the truck and I'm looking at the fridge and I'm like, did you guys measure? And they're like, yeah, we measured. It's good. So this U-Haul truck did not have like a thing where you like a ladder that goes down, like a ramp.
Yeah.
It didn't have one. So for $10 more, they could have got one with a ramp.
But we got
but they got the cheapest version of U-Haul that you could get. And once they got the fridge up, once they lifted it up with straps in the air and it's suspended in air by 2 men, I could see that the fridge was clearly 2 inches taller than the door. And I'm like, you guys. And they're like,
you're not going to be able to move that.
Yeah, they're
and I'm trying to like shimmy it, and I'm trying to like get it at an angle. And I'm under this fridge the whole time, mind you. And I'm trying to get it taken care of. And I'm like, we can get it in. We can go from there. Here, keep telling. I'll go get Sean really quick.
Okay. And so I'm like, okay, this is when I'm working out a lot. Okay, I'm super strong. I could do 6 plates.
Yeah, you're like, I got this. Like, I can just push this.
And I'm like, the only way that this is going to work is if you guys lay it down and I'm going to get under it.
Yeah.
And I can leg press it and you guys can just slide it across my back. So we can slide it across my body.
This is a great idea.
Yeah, and as I'm getting under the fridge, which Frankie is holding and this other guy, I'm thinking to myself, like, how or why are these people letting me get underneath this fridge right now? And then I can also when they're pushing it, so I did get under it and I was suspending it with my leg muscles.
And I was next to her and I'm like, Grayson, we're not doing this. Like, this is not going to work.
He was getting upset with me.
I'm like, please don't do this. This is not going to work.
I could feel exactly where it was hitting. It was the back of the refrigerator. It's like a sliver of metal that was just ever so slightly catching on the edge of the truck. And I could feel it with my fingers, exactly where it was happening. So I'm like this, and I'm holding the back of the fridge, and I could feel what was going on behind me. And I said, okay, guys, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. And on the count of 3, I need you to hold it. But there is a 50% chance I lose my finger. I literally said that.
She says it out loud. Yeah.
A 50% chance I lose my finger right now.
Then why are we? No, like, let's just not.
He didn't say
This
that.
is a horrible idea.
Yeah. No, it was a horrible idea.
He's thinking in his head, though. Like,
yeah.
I'm like, what are we doing?
He was kind of getting upset. And
but at this point, I've been under this fridge for so long. I'm like
shaking.
struggling. Like, I'm shaking. I'm literally holding it.
It's
like,
so heavy. It's such a huge fridge full of packed with food. So then I said 1, 2, 3, and they didn't hold it up, and it came slamming down on my finger, and it felt like my nail got ripped out. So like I felt the pressure, and I went like, ow, like that. And when I went like that, I could clearly feel that my finger was shorter, and I wanted to believe that it was just because you are forever born.
I'm like thinking about this like, oh
yeah, you can feel like your body, right? Like, you know your body very, very well. It's what you're born with. I was with it for like 20 plus years. Yeah.
Not there.
And when I went like this, like to relieve almost pressure, my finger was not there. So like I could clearly feel like, I'm like, oh crap. And I just ignore it. I'm like, it's okay, it was just my nail. And I'm just like, keep going, like trying to push the fridge. But all of a sudden I feel warm on my arm. And I look down and I just see blood everywhere. And then I open my hand and then my finger is shooting blood all over, like
Graceland.
And okay, so they're
like,
running around panicking,
oh no.
And everyone leaves me under this fridge. Like, so I'm holding this massive side by side on a U-Haul under this fridge. Everyone takes off, and I'm like yelling. I'm like, someone help me!
I'm holding this, but I didn't lose a finger.
I just quickly wrapped my thing. I looked, and then where the fridge was, our minivan was right behind. So if he let it go, it was going to fall on our minivan. And so
I'm begging someone to move.
He said, please move it.
The
so
van.
I happened to be the person who was like, where are your keys?
Stop.
Yeah. I go into his pocket.
Yeah.
And I get his keys with my left hand. And I go and I start the minivan with my left hand, and I put it in drive and I move it forward. And as soon as I moved it forward, they dropped the fridge and it exploded everywhere. This is in Lafayette Square.
Everything.
So the houses are close together. Everyone can hear everything. Everyone comes out of their houses because all the commotion. And I remember the first person I told that I lost my finger, which no one at that point knew that I lost my finger. I was just like, ow, it was just my nail. Never mind. And then the lady came out next door and I was like, she goes, is everything okay? I was like, I think I just lost my finger. That's all I said. And she's like, what? Oh no.
Did you find your finger?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went to the back of the minivan and I was like, hey guys, is my finger over there? And then the guy in the truck starts laughing. And he's like, oh, no. Like I'm joking. And then I looked at Frankie. I'm like, no, seriously, is my finger over there? And then he goes, and you could see he starts getting upset. He's like, Graceland, did you lose your finger? And then all of a sudden, like I told you, my mother-in-law saw my finger on the back of the bed of the truck and grabs my finger and then is screaming. And then she goes and puts it on ice. And then I was like, I'm fine. It doesn't hurt at all, which it didn't hurt at all.
Well,
and
that's
then
good.
Yeah, I think it was like just the pressure, like the amount of pressure. So I drove myself to the emergency room hospital. I go in, I tell them I cut my finger off in the cup, and I'm showing her.
Here's my finger.
Yeah, but she did not enter me as a person who had a amputation. She entered me as somebody who had a severed finger. Severed meaning a cut finger.
Like, no, it's
so then
off.
sat there for 7 hours waiting to be seen. And the whole time the ice is melting, my finger's going down in the water. And even they're like taking pictures of the x-ray, and they're taking it out of the icy water and putting it there and taking x-rays and putting it back in the water. So like everyone that I had seen, and I'm like telling everyone the story. I'm amped up with adrenaline. It didn't hurt at all the whole 7 hours that I was there. It only hurt when they started doing surgery on it. It was so bizarre.
I found it. Finally, hold on.
Oh.
Which one? Which one?
Okay. It's completely gone.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's gone.
Did she have a little bit of her nail? It looks like she had
No, it's just the skin.
So it ripped out. So there is a picture of my finger in the bag.
OMG.
I don't have that one.
That's bad.
So there is a picture of my finger in the bag.
It looked like a
ice.
nail because it was almost like
you can see the bone.
severed that like I thought that was acrylic.
Yeah.
It looks like it's like a little bit of
So it like ripped out of my nail bed. So when you look at the finger, you can see like the actual, like our nail beds go like way back.
I can see that
here.
now. That's just straight skin.
Yeah. And that is, and a little bit of bone. Like there's a little bit of bone there. They had to actually cut my bone back to pull the skin over to sew it closed. And I remember I was still like so full of adrenaline that they gave me a shot to like calm me down and shut me up, because I just kept telling everybody like, if it had been a knife, that would have been so much worse. Like, I'm glad it was a refrigerator, because like I didn't even feel anything, and it like I'm totally fine. And then when they gave me the medicine, like I remember looking at my finger, I'm like, that is awful. This is the best you could do. You're the best surgeon for this.
She was like all concerned cosmetically.
Yeah,
She's like,
I was
this
like,
does not look cute. She's like, my husband's not.
This is not sexy. Like, does this look sexy to you?
Do you want me to go into the room?
Yeah.
Like this?
I'm like, what happened to my finger? And they're like, your finger's dead because you left it in the water for 7 hours. You killed all the nerves. You can't do that. You have to.
You're like, I told you guys. I came into emergency.
Yeah,
I
showed you my finger.
I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, have you ever heard of Lorena Bobbitt? Like, she cut off something way bigger than a tip of a finger.
And it still was fine.
And yes. And I was like, and you can't even make that, like, my finger work. And they asked me if I wanted to keep it. I'm like, what am I going to do with the tip of my finger? I was so upset about it.
So they didn't keep it.
I didn't keep it.
I threw it in the trash can and she was leaving.
I was so upset. And then when I told the surgeon, like, this is such an ugly job and it's square and I don't think you did a great job. He was like, I'm not sewing a dress, honey. Like, I'm doing surgery on a human body part. It's just like, okay, well, I'm not happy about it. You should have brought me
back an hour, not 7 hours later.
Yeah, seriously. I was so upset about the whole thing. Plus, I was at the wrong hospital. They said always go downtown for the hand surgeon. So, long story short, always use a good lender like a firm capital.
Yes, for your
good
lending
doctors,
needs.
good lenders.
Don't become homeless and lose your finger.
Pre-approval, not pre-qualification.
Yes.
Pre-approved.
Yes, pre-approved. Submit your documentation, ask questions, make sure you have everything dialed in. Make sure you're comfortable with
your payment.
And you don't have to submit offers at your max purchase price. Submit offers at the price you're comfortable with. Know about taxes, know about insurance, closing costs. But if you don't want to know all that, you can call Jessica and she will take care of it for you and make sure you're on the right path and not end up like Graceland and me and not have a finger and a broken fridge.
Yes. And salmonella.
There you go.
But thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
So where can people find you if they're looking for you online, social media? Easiest way to get a hold of you.
So, well, my website, www.imyourloangirl.com or 559-477-8659 cell phone.
Nice.
Look at that. Cell phone, direct contact. Call
today.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Probably the best way. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
I'll give you a hug.